Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming tonight. I'm Emily McDonnell. I work in the Office of Lifelong Formation, and we have Michael Marchand with us today. I'll let him introduce himself in a minute, but let's start with prayer. So in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Dear Lord, we ask you to be with us tonight. We ask you to open us up to your Spirit so that we come here to learn more about our ministry and more about what we can do for your youth, because we know that our purpose in our ministry is to bring our youth closer to you and to help build lifelong missionary disciples. So we ask that you bring us together to bring us closer to that mission today. We ask this in your name, amen. In the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. Awesome, and I'll hand it over to Michael.
Hello. Hey guys, my name is Michael. I am currently in the Project YM studio in the heart of the Innovation District in downtown Chattanooga, Tennessee. It's where I live with my family, but we founded a organization called Project YM 8-ish years ago, and it is just centered around supporting, loving Catholic youth ministers. I was in Catholic youth ministry in a parish for 11 years before Project YM grew to the point where I could do it full time. And so for the last, almost 4 years, maybe 5, I'm not really good at counting. I've been doing this full time, but really, like, I get the blessing of hanging out with people like you all day, every day, just serving youth ministers and loving youth ministers. We are part of an organization called Ablaze Ministries, which has a couple of different ministries, but we really are focused in on serving youth workers. So here's the plan. I'm gonna tell you a little bit about me, and we're gonna dive into a whole bunch of content tonight. I explained earlier in our first session that I have a problem when it comes to cooking. I love to cook, but I am terrible at quantities. And so, like, I always have way too much food. It is one of my biggest fears in life to not have enough food when someone comes over to my house. And so we always make way too much. That's true for tonight as well. I have way more content probably than is allotted. So we're gonna try to go through a bunch of stuff, but if you have questions, unmute your mic and just shout at me. And I'm happy to answer questions as we go. Technically, here's the way this works. I don't do share screen because then when you're on mobile, it looks funky and it just makes things more difficult. So what's gonna happen in a second is my video is going to be replaced by the slides we're talking about, and you'll see my beautiful face down in the corner. But so for you, if you're watching on a computer, it means you want to switch to speaker view, which is a little button up in the top right-hand corner. And then you want to click on my video and click pin video. That way, when someone else sneezes or asks a question, it doesn't like shift focus, it stays on me. Sound good? All right, here we go. Like I said, my name is Michael. I'm a director and founder of Project YM. I am incredibly happy to help you with anything you guys might need. So if you have any questions, something about we covered tonight, or just about ministry or life in general, I am happy to help. Shoot us an email at hello@projectym.com. Anytime, we will love to help you. Like I said, I live in the beautiful city of Chattanooga, Tennessee. It's gorgeous if you've never been here. East Tennessee is beautiful. We're right outside the Smoky Mountains. Tennessee River is gorgeous. It's worth coming for a visit. I've got a guest room. You're welcome to come stay with us. Speaking of, I got a beautiful family, 4 kids, ranging in ages from 2 to 12. This right here, does anybody know what kind of car this is? This is a Spectrum. Anybody ever driven a Spectrum? It is not a classy car. It is not like something you should idolize to be driving. But I've never driven one either. I just simply put it in here because I feel like I've done ministry in a broad spectrum of situations, and I love a good pun. So I've done everything from working in campus ministry up there in Chicago to ministry in a large, wealthy parish in Atlanta to a small parish in Texas, and everything in between. I have worked with thousands of youth ministers at this point. So I feel like what we're talking about tonight is not only rooted in my experience, but rooted in the experience of thousands of youth ministers. So I never teach anything that I don't have proof that it works. And so we're all about that. I am also the best Monopoly player you'll ever meet. And so if you are a Monopoly fan, would love to play Monopoly one day with you. Also, most importantly, I come from the greatest nation in the world, Texas. And so I'm happy to be able to call that my home state. I actually went to school up in Chicago at Loyola University. And so I graduated from there a while back, met my wife. She's a suburb girl from Chicago. We got married at St. Anne's up in Barrington. And really, so I love Chicago, just not in the winters. So there's that. All right, so before we get started, quick status check. I've got a question for you, pop quiz. You're gonna answer it in the chat. So be ready to go. I'm gonna have you answer several things in the chat. So if you don't have the chat bubble pulled up, go ahead and do that. Here's a question. How would you rate yourself right now? And you can take that to mean anything you want to take it to mean. 1, 2, 3, or 4. Right now, where would you rate yourself? How are you feeling tonight on this beautiful October night? 2s, 1. Yeah, it's a rough season for a lot of people, and so it is definitely an interesting time to be in ministry. All right, I got pop quiz question number 2. How would you describe your ministry right now? Now, before you type it in, I've got multiple choice for you. Are you ready? How would you describe your ministry right now? Which one of these pictures best describes how you feel about your ministry right now? Is it A, B, C, D, E, or F? Which of these best describes your ministry right now? Go ahead, type it in A, B, C, D, E, or F. No shame, go ahead and whatever, just be honest. We're all good, we've been there. All right. So this whole process we're doing right now, it's actually something we've been testing out with teenagers. And we're working on some resources. I don't have any to share with you yet, but soon. We're working on some resources to figure out how we help young people talk more and share more about what's going on in their life. And we've seen incredible success by using visuals. So basically we'll do like a temperature check at the beginning of our small groups. And we'll give them a sheet of images, and we try to do new ones every week. And say, hey, like which one of these best shows how you're feeling right now or what's going on in your world right now. It's been really successful. It's been really effective. We kind of stole the idea. I don't know if any of you guys have done Alpha. Alpha does, they have a picture of a swimming pool. That's an integral part of how they explain where young people are at in their faith. And that is an incredible tool. If you've never done Alpha with your teenagers, I highly recommend it. It's like my favorite. So, all right, let's have story time. I know maybe it's probably a little early for bedtime out for you guys, but let's snuggle in. Let's have a bedtime story. I want to tell you about a man you've probably heard of. His name is Jesus. He one day was spending the day on the shore of the Sea of Galilee, and he was spending the day preaching. And I think one of the things we miss a lot when we think about who Jesus is we forget that for Jesus's time, Jesus was somewhat of a rock star. Like people loved him. Like everywhere he went, they flocked to him. They like asked for his autograph. Like they were big fans of Jesus. And so when Jesus pulls up on the side of the shore and starts preaching, the multitudes come. Hundreds, thousands of people show up to hear him speak. And it's really incredible to think that even if they can't hear his voice, right, they're still there. And I don't have like scriptural backing for this, but I feel like they're probably cheering a lot. They're probably chanting his name, like waving big foam fingers up in the air. Like they're fans, like they're excited he's there. And he just has this moment where he is just sharing with all these people, and his disciples, ordinary, run-of-the-mill people, like they're kind of getting the glow from him, right? Like, they're not quite as famous as Jesus, but like people know their names now, right? Like, so they're Jesus's inner crew, and so they're having a good day too, like, right? Everybody's happy and excited. And as the day comes to an end, Jesus looks to his disciples and says, "Hey, I want to get in the boat. I want to get in the boat, and I want to go over to the other side of the sea." Now, for us, reading that story, it just sounds like Jesus wants to take a nice little boat trip. But when you think about where he's going, it's way more than that. So Jesus is about to cross the Sea of Galilee to a place that we call the land of the Gerasenes. Now, the Gerasenes are not big fans of the Jews, right? So Jesus, being a Jew, is not welcome there. In fact, not only is he not welcome there, that's probably not even strong enough language, because he is at risk there. That if he crosses, if he goes to their land, like, he is putting his life on the line. He's literally risking everything to go there. And when you think about the fact that he is standing right now in a place that not only do the people love him, but it's also a place he's very familiar with. He grew up around there. Like, he knows the place, and everyone knows him, and people love him. And he's going to a totally unknown place where he's risking everything. He's giving up everything to go to this really unknown place, to go to the other side, to this scary, scary place. But there's something that's calling him there. There's something that Jesus is saying, I need to go there. I need to be there. And so reluctantly, the disciples climb into the boat and they set sail across to the other side. And as they get to the shore and they start unloading from the boat, they notice a man off in the distance. And this man is running to them, like full speed running. And they can see he's like waving his arms. And as he gets closer, they can kind of hear him. He's screaming, and not like "Jesus, I love you" screams like the fans on the other side of the shore. Like, he's screaming obscenities. Like, he is just out of his mind. And as it gets even closer, they notice that he's got shackles and chains from his wrists and from his feet. And he's got rocks in his hands, and he is literally smashing his chest and his face as he's running at them. And as he gets even closer, they notice that he is bloody and bruised. He is just disgusting looking. I mean, I wasn't there, but I feel like he probably looked something like this guy. Like, he was bloody and gross and disgusting. Okay, wait. An important thing. He probably, not only was he bloody and gross and disgusting, but he was also naked. So he probably looked more like this guy. And so he is running at Jesus, like wailing and screaming and smashing rocks. And we start to kind of get a glimpse of who he is. That he is a man that the people of his town have written off. In fact, they felt that he was so worthless and that he had no hope and that he was a failure, a crazy man, possessed, had no value, that they chained him up in a cemetery. Like, can you imagine how little you have to think of a person that you would be willing to chain them up in a cemetery and leave them there? And this man, chained, broken, alone, didn't know what to do, couldn't figure out what was going on. And so the only thing he could do was he started to cut himself and beat himself and wound himself and just do whatever he could to express something, and wailing and screaming until he saw Jesus come ashore, and something in him jumped, something in him leaped, and he burst the chains and he ran to Jesus. And so he comes running to Jesus. And I can't really speak for Jesus because he's got a lot on me, but I'm going to assume that the disciples, if they're anything like me, they would be rushing back to the boat. Like, crazy, wailing, bloody, shackled, naked man running at me. Like, I'm going the other way. Like, I don't know about you guys, but I'm going the other way. But Jesus, he stands there with open arms. And as the man comes closer, Jesus reaches out to him in love. This man, this crazy, possessed man, says what I think are probably the scariest words in all of Scripture. He looks at Jesus and he says, "We are legion, and there are many." Like I don't know about you, but like that, like every like horror movie in my head is like screaming, like, "We are legion, we are many." Like that's terrifying. Like I can't even imagine. But Jesus, again, this loving God, looks at him, smiles, opens his hands, and he takes the pain and the hurt and the brokenness and the sin and the possession and the demon and all of that, and he casts it out of him. And he casts it, if you've heard the story, into a herd of pigs nearby. And we all know the story, right? The pigs go crazy and they run and they jump off the cliff. My favorite thing, actually, when I tell this story to middle schoolers is to have them recreate that sound. Like, what would the sound be like of a herd of pigs going crazy and jumping off the cliff? It's amazing. You should just, even if you don't tell the story, you should just have a bunch of middle schoolers to make that sound for you. But so he is standing there, and I think a lot of times, especially young people, when they hear this story, their first question is about the pigs. Their first question is like, well, why would he do that? Like, what? Perfectly good bacon just jumped off a cliff. Like, why would Jesus do that? And I think it's important that we realize that everybody else in this man's life wrote him off and thought that everything that he was dealing with was all in his head, that he was just crazy. Don't worry about him. You just don't even think about him. And Jesus was showing to the world that this pain, this hurt, this stuff that was going on inside him was very real. Right? It was real enough that it sent a herd of pigs off the cliff. Right? That it would be easy for somebody to say, oh, you're better now. Oh yeah, so I guess it was just in your head. But for them to be able to point, no. Like, don't you remember the pigs? Don't you remember this thing that was inside me, this pain, this hurt? It was real. And I think a lot of times we struggle with that same thing, right? Like we encounter people and we have a hard time respecting what they're really going through. Like we come up with like quick solutions, or tell them to just get over it. Or especially working with young people, like they break up with their girlfriend they've been dating for a week and a half, and like they're wounded to the core, and we're like, it's just it's ninth grade romance. You weren't gonna marry her, right? Like, and so it's easy for us to kind of dismiss the pain they're going through, but I think it's important for us to realize that the pain that young people face and the pain that this man faced were really real. And so we have this man, Jesus takes him from this, heals him, restores him, makes him clean, makes him new, to this. And immediately, Jesus, after performing this great miracle, he turns around and he starts to get back in the boat. And to me, that's the most profound moment of this whole story. Because Jesus left everything. He left fame and popularity and comfort and joy and security. He risked it all. He went to a place he didn't know. He put his life in danger, not to heal hundreds of people. He did it all for one person. He did it for one man. And the crazy thing is, not only did he do it for him, he did it for me. And he did it for you. That Jesus left everything, endured everything for me, for you. And that he did it for each one of your teens. He did it for each one of those young people that we love and that we serve. And I think as we start to get kind of wrapped up in program and wrapped up in planning and wrapped up in the what of ministry, we forget about the why. We forget about that our job as ministers is to convey to these young people that he did it for them, that he died for them, that he loves them individually, that he would risk everything, give up everything for them. Because the question really is, do they know that? Do the young people that you're serving, do they know how much Jesus loves them? And more importantly, do they know him? Because at the end of the day, that's the why. If you're in ministry for any reason other than to introduce young people to Jesus, then we're in it for the wrong reasons. That's the why. And so the man is healed, and he comes back to Jesus, and he finds Jesus waiting for him by the boat. And he does what I think we would all do, is he starts to climb in the boat. Like, Jesus, you've healed me. You've transformed my life. Like, I just want to, let's go. I'm in. Wherever you want to go, I'm in. And Jesus looks at him and tells him no. Jesus just healed this man, and he's ready to drop everything and come follow after Jesus. And Jesus says no. Because this man has a different mission. This man has a different purpose. He tells him, no, you have to go back to your town, to your village, to your family, to those people who abandoned you. You have to go back to them and tell them about me. Tell them what I've done here. Tell them how I've transformed your life. He's given a mission. And Jesus knows that he is going to be the best evangelist, because people who have an encounter with Jesus can't help but tell other people about him. Like, that's just the way it works. It happens over and over again in Scripture, right? When people encounter Jesus for real, the first thing they want to do is go tell other people about him, right? When Jesus finds Philip, he encounters him. The first thing he does is goes and finds Nathanael. When Jesus encounters the Samaritan woman, the first thing she does is runs and tells everybody about it. When the disciples meet Jesus on the road to Emmaus, the first thing they do is run back to Jerusalem and tell everybody about it. Peter, when Peter is going around healing people after Jesus is risen, he's told by the Sanhedrin to stop talking about Jesus. And he says what I think is probably my favorite verse in all of Scripture. Peter looks at him and he says, I can't. You do whatever you have to do to me, but it is impossible for us to not speak about what we've seen and heard. Like, we've been with Jesus. We've seen him. We know him. It's impossible for us to not talk about it. In fact, not only is it impossible, he's actually entrusted us with the mission to do just that, to be his witnesses in Jerusalem, throughout Judea and Samaria, and to the ends of the earth. And it's not just Peter who echoes that statement. The church echoes that statement. Pope Paul VI says that the essential mission of the church is evangelizing all people. That's it. The essential mission of the church is to evangelize all people. That the primary reason the church exists, her deepest identity, is to evangelize. And I think we miss that. And truthfully, I don't know that I've ever been to a Catholic parish where I would say the reason that parish exists is to evangelize. Maybe that's your parish, but I'm just based on my experience, I'm going to say that's doubtful. Like, the church doesn't exist for the sacraments. We love the sacraments, but the church doesn't exist for them. The church doesn't exist for community. I love community, but the church doesn't exist for community. The church doesn't exist. Her deepest identity is not in social justice or mission trips. Her deepest identity is in telling other people about Jesus. That's the primary reason she exists. And if she's not doing that, then the rest of the stuff doesn't matter. She exists in order to evangelize. It's her deepest identity. And it doesn't end with Pope Paul VI. The other popes say the same. Pope John Paul II said that no believer in Christ, no institution of the church can avoid this supreme duty to proclaim Christ to all peoples. Pope Francis goes even further to say that to be a Christian and to be a missionary is the same thing. Now, I say all that, and maybe I'm preaching to the choir because we are in ministry because we want to tell people about Jesus, but I think it's important for us to be reminded that we have our own mission territory. We have our own place that we've been sent. That man was sent back to his town. You and I were sent to a very different place. We were sent to share the gospel, not in a place with thatched roofs, but in a place that is lined with these. That we were sent to share the gospel with young people. And we're gonna, as we go through tonight, we're gonna look at three big things. And I'm a big fan of alliteration. And so we're gonna hit three topics that are alliterated because, I don't know, it makes me happy. But so we're gonna look at three things. We're gonna look at the target, and we're gonna look at the territory, and we're gonna look at the tactic. And so we're going to start here on target. And so I think it's really important as we try to figure out what we're excited about, what we're passionate about, that we can clearly define who our target audience is, that we can clearly define what we are called to do. And so I want to look at this target audience, this group that you and I have been called to serve. Here we go. All right. That target is Generation Z. So there's a study that came out not that long ago from the Barna Group and Impact 360 Institute. Just by show of hands or shouts in the chat, has anybody read this study? No? Awesome. So this is all going to be wonderfully new news. So the Barna Group is a very well-respected research institute, and they partnered with Impact 360 to do a study of Generation Z. And they went through a really detailed study of thousands and thousands of young people to get this data. If you want to kind of see the source for the data we're going to talk about, you can go to whoisgenz.com and you can actually buy the resource. I think it's $35 to get the full study. We're just going to hit the highlight reel today, because I think it's important as we start talking about methods and strategies so we understand who it is we're serving. All right, so the first thing we're going to do, Barna outlines 6 core factors that go on to explain who this generation of young people is. That first factor is that they are screenagers, which is just a terrible term and I hate it, but it is the term Barna uses. It calls them screenagers. I like to call them digital natives, right? They have grown up with this phone in their hands, right? They encounter the world through the camera lens of their phone. They are totally bombarded with social media all the time. In fact, the stats are that 57% of them use screen media at least 4 hours per day. 57% use screen media at least 4 hours per day. And truthfully, that number has skyrocketed right now because of the number of them who are doing online education and online schooling. 26% at least 8 hours per day. But here's where it gets heartbreaking. 31% say that looking at other people's social media posts often makes them feel bad about the way I look. 39% say that looking at other people's social posts often make me feel bad about the lack of excitement in my own life. And 33% admit to having experienced bullying on social media. It's a real part of their world. It's something that you and I didn't grow up with, right? When you or I were bullied, when we left and went home, when we left school and went home, it ended. And we could at least have those 12 hours of break before we returned to school. That's not true anymore. It follows them home. It follows them everywhere. Number 2, they have a post-Christian worldview. This is the first generation that has grown up in a post-Christian world, in a world where the primary focus of the society is no longer Christocentric. 59% of Gen Z identify as Christian. That's down from 65% of millennials and Gen X and 75% of boomers. 43% have recently attended church, and for the sake of the Barna study, for them, recently attended means within the last month. So within the last month, they've been to church. But only 9% are what they would call an engaged Christian, someone who is actively involved in their church. 17% of Gen Z identify as Catholics. Again, that number is down significantly from previous generations. And 13%, 13% say they're atheists. That number, 13%, is more than double. Only 6% of adults claim atheism. But we have a generation of young people who, at a more than double the rate of adults, are saying they're atheists. And then 34% have no religious affiliation. Now, if you ever follow Word on Fire or Bishop Robert Barron, he talks a lot about the rise of the nuns, right? This group, this segment of young people who have no religious affiliation. It's growing. And it's important for us to understand Barna kind of takes all of this into consideration and comes up with what they think is the best phrase to describe the religious viewpoint of the generation. Now, I will say with all of these are overall statistics. Obviously, there are individual young people who don't fit these stereotypes or who don't fit these examples, but Barna calls them moralistic therapeutic deists. Moralistic therapeutic deists. And what that means is they explain that they believe that there is a God who exists, who created and orders the world and watches over life on earth. That God wants people to be good, nice, and fair to each other, as taught in the Bible and by most world religions. That the central goal of life is to be happy and to feel good about oneself. And that God is not involved in my life except when I need God to resolve a problem. And that good people go to heaven when they die. Right? Objectively, these are not bad things. Like, they're not like, this is not a terrible worldview, but it is not a Catholic worldview. And so as we continue through this, we have to understand this generation is looking at things in a very different way. It's looking at things not the way that you and I look at them through our Catholic Church lens. We're looking at them through a very different perspective. Number 3, that they believe that safe spaces are normal. You've probably seen that phrase a lot. There's a lot of schools have stickers that say that, but it's a generation that believes in being inclusive and being non-judgmental. It's typified by this kind of kitschy phrase of "you do you," right? Like this idea that like as long as everybody, as long as you're not harming other people, you just do whatever you want to do. You do you. And so this worldview means that they are reluctant to make declarative statements about anything that would cause offense, which means they're reluctant to make declarative statements about what they believe. Because if I believe in something that offends you, then I would rather not talk about it than risk offending you. That makes evangelization very difficult. This lens that they live in is automatically classifying evangelization as hate speech. Like, that's a crazy shift in the way the world sees things. All right. Number 4, that real safety is a myth. Some people like to call Generation Z the homeland generation. It's this idea that 9/11 happened before they were born, and so their entire life we've been a country at war. That they don't really have a firm belief in safety, in their own physical safety, right? That school shootings are happening all across the country, right? Like even school is not safe for them. It's this difference. Barna explains that millennials are best typified by the movie Harry Potter, right? That they have this like fantasy where they can escape into and all work together, and good always triumphs over evil, right? Like, but for Generation Z, the best movie to typify their experience is Hunger Games, right? That they feel like everything is against them, right? They're having to fight to survive, that they're never safe. They can't sleep, they can't rest, that real safety is a myth. All right, number 5, they're diverse. In fact, this is the most diverse generation we've ever seen in America. And so because of that, acceptance is a primary value for theirs. And for the first time ever, we have a generation where the elevation of non-male and non-white is a generational marker. That's not a negative thing, but it is a different thing, right? That we've never had a generation before that typifies with a non-male, non-white generational marker. 48% are non-Caucasian. 59% have friends of a different sexual orientation. And 31% agree that most of their friends do not share their beliefs. Not some of their friends, most of their friends do not share their beliefs. All right, and number 6, that parents are double-minded. This is one of the more interesting things to me. I am a parent of a middle schooler, and so like I feel like it's an interesting thing for me to look at through this lens. But there's this idea that you have a wild pendulum of parenting, that you have the, I don't know, the helicopter parent, right? The overprotective and over-involved, and kids don't get to do anything or make their own decisions about anything. Like the parent is like super over-involved. And that is a direct result of how they were raised, because we are seeing Gen X, which the majority of Gen Z parents are Gen X, with a handful of millennials, but the majority of them are Gen X. They encountered this big world shift. If we back forward for a second, in 1971, statistically, 80% of third graders walked to school alone. 80%. By the time this generation of parents were kids, when they were being raised, when they were in third grade, by 1990, only 9% of third graders walked to school alone. That's an incredibly different worldview. And statistically, we can prove that the world is not more dangerous statistically. We just perceive it to be that way. And so that perception has creeped into the minds of parents. And so we have a more overprotective, over-involved parents, but they also, because they worry about being helicopter parents, they like seesaw back and forth between being overprotective and over-involved and underprotective and detached. Most often that comes to things related to technology, right? That they feel like their parents never gave them privacy, and so they want that for their young people, their children. That their parents were too meddling, and so they want them to have pockets of life where they can be themselves, where they can make their own decisions. And unfortunately, the most common place where they make that decision is regards to electronics and social media. And so it's why we have so many young people just decimated by pornography and by encounters they have through social media, because their parents either don't know or don't have any interest in learning what's going on at their on their phones. And so that leaves young people confused at best, because they don't know if their parents are going to be there. They don't know, like, hey, if I can go to them about this, if they're going to care, or if they're going to freak out and ground me. Right. So you have that, like, that weird dichotomy of like parents trying to be their best friend, but then also punishing them a lot. It's like, this is weird. They don't know what to do. And so in response, they just don't talk to their parents because they don't know how they're going to respond. And at worst, it leaves young people isolated, lonely, and desperate. All right. We've got a little more we're going to do, but I just wanted to pause for just a second. Any questions, thoughts, concerns about any of that? Shout them out, type them in the chat. Going once. Going twice. No? Nothing? Nobody? All right. Awesome. All right. So let's keep rolling, because I know you guys want to get to the practical. Like, let's take it to the next level. All right, here we go. All right. So the other thing that the study talks about is identity. And so I want to just, again, there's so much more in this study than we're covering. I just want to hit some of the things I think are really important for us to understand. And so I have a question for you. Fill in the blank for yourself. Blank is the most important to my sense of self. What is the thing in your life that is most important to defining who you are? Think for a minute, and if you're brave, go ahead and type that in the chat. What's that thing that is most important to your sense of self? I'm gonna wait just a second. At least somebody who's gonna be the winner. Somebody put it in the chat. So what's crazy is, for generations, for Gen X, for millennials, for baby boomers, like for even before that, every study that we have of any generation in America has always said the same thing. The response has always been the same to this question over and over again. And that response has been family. Overwhelmingly, the number one answer for the most important to their sense of self has been family, over and over again. Gen Z does not follow that trend. For the first time, we have a generation who is saying that the most important thing to their sense of self is not family. Any guesses on what they think the most important thing to their sense of self is? Go ahead and put them in the chat right now, make a guess. What do you think Gen Z fills this blank in with? What's most important to their sense of self? What's crazy is there's a pretty close tie between 1 and 2, so we're going to talk about both of them sort of equally. But the number one response of what's most important to my sense of self from Generation Z is personal achievement. Their accomplishments are the most important thing to determining their self-worth and who they are, their accomplishments. And right behind that, so I've noticed that number 43%, at 42%, right behind that is their hobbies. So the most important thing for young people to determine who they are and what they're worth is what they've accomplished and what they do. That's incredibly important for us to understand, because that is a incredibly warped worldview from where we want them to be. Right? The most important thing to determine their value is what they have accomplished. Right? The gospel tells us the exact opposite, right? And so it's very important for us to understand this as we're planning out program and as we're thinking about ministry, because what a lot of youth ministers do, and I'm sure none of you guys do it because you guys are all probably brilliant youth ministers, but what a lot of churches do is they make young people choose between what they do, their hobbies, their sports, and church. Right? They put them in this position where we force them to choose, hey, either you show up for this retreat or you go to your soccer tournament. And what we fail to realize is we're talking to a generation of young people who the thing that is most foundational to who they are, whether we are glad that it is or not, is what they do, is their accomplishments, right? That tournament that they think they're going to win. That soccer game that is incredibly important to them because they're a soccer player first and foremost. And so anytime we make them make that choice, we lose. Anytime we make them make that choice, we lose. Because even if their parents force them to show up for the retreat or the meeting or the church, whatever it is, they automatically resent us because we've made them choose something that goes contrary to who they see themselves as. Now, yes, would it be a wonderful and amazing if they found that their faith was the thing that was most core to who they are, and so they would always want to choose Jesus over soccer? Yes, that would be awesome, but that's not where they are. And I think we have to realize that if we're going to do ministry with young people, we can't do ministry to where we wish they were or where we are. We have to do ministry to where they are. And so we have to understand what's important to them. Here's the even bigger shocker to me. Number 3, the third most important thing to them to determining their self-worth, who they are, and their value is their gender and their sexuality. No generation before has that been on there. Like that hasn't been in the top 5 for any of these other generations. All of a sudden, their gender and their sexuality are rated their third most, before family, before friends, before Jesus, right? Their gender and their sexuality are most important to their sense of self. That is a profoundly different worldview that I'm going to imagine most of us hold. All right. Number 4 is their group of friends. The fourth most important thing to their sense of self is their group of friends. And number 5 is their family. And not until you get to number 6 do we find religion and their religious beliefs. These last couple things I'm just going to go through rapid fire because there's way more I want to talk about, but it's worth looking at. 12% describe their sexuality as something other than heterosexual, compared to 3% of adults. Right, that's a huge difference. 59% have friends of a different sexual orientation. 48% say gender is primarily based on the sex a person was born as. So over half of young people believe that their gender is not based on the sex they were born. 33%, a third of Generation Z believes that gender is primarily based on what a person feels like. And this is one of my favorite statistics, actually. 51% believe that gender is talked about too much in culture and society. It's foundational to who they are, but it's talked about too much. And I'm gonna, this is not Barna, this is a Michael theory. I'm gonna bet that what they're really saying is you adults who don't get it are talking about it too much. All right. One last pop quiz. What do you think they said when the question was asked, what's the number one thing you want to accomplish before age 30? Type in the chat, what do you think is like, what do you think was their top answer of, I want to accomplish before age 30? Any guesses? All right. So here's the quick rundown, and we don't have time to like go through all of these, but I just wanted to show them to you. All right, their answers were: number one was finish their education, start a career, become financially independent, follow my dreams, enjoy life by having adult responsibilities, find out who I really am, travel to other countries, get married, become more mature spiritually, become a parent, care for the poor and the needy, and try to become famous or influential. 51% of young people say that happiness is their ultimate goal, and 43% of them define happiness as financial success. 24% say what is morally right and wrong changes over time, and that what is morally wrong depends on what an individual believes. Only 34% of Generation Z says that lying is morally wrong. That's crazy. 34% say lying is morally wrong. And here's maybe one of the most important facts for us to think about. 54% of Gen Z believes that church involvement is not important. So that's sort of what we're looking for, right? And so the majority of them believe it's not important. All right, we're going to keep going rapid fire. We're going to get to more stuff in a sec. Oh, no, I have more on here. All right, here we go. So that was target. Let's talk about territory for a second. So the territory that we're serving is best described, at least by Barna, as being Babylon. And so if you think about this idea that we are going into a specific territory to serve, one of the best examples to look at is that of Saint Cyril and Methodius. I don't know if you guys know the story of Saint Cyril and Methodius, but the short version is they traveled to the island of Moravia to share the gospel with the people. They were going to like distribute the gospel, and they realized the people had no written language. And so Saint Cyril and Methodius could have done a couple of things. They could have given up. They could have forced the people to learn their language. But instead, they spent years learning the culture and helped them develop a written language so that they could share the gospel. We know it now as the Cyrillic alphabet, right? Came from this desire to share the gospel. And so I think for us, we need to be aware of the generation that we're serving that is very different than us, and they have their own language, their own way of seeing things. So I thought it would be worth taking a minute, and we're not going to play the whole game because I know it's late. We're not going to do that, but we have a game over at Project YM called Gen Z Say What. And I'm just going to challenge you real quick. We're just going to do a couple. Can you figure out what these Gen Z slang terms mean? Does anybody think they're like a Gen Z linguistic expert? Oh, Ashley thinks she is. All right. So you can put your guesses in the chat so we can all laugh at you. Here we go. On blast. If a young person says that I'm going to put you on blast, what does that mean? Does anybody know? Ashley does. She's got it. Yeah, it's you call someone out. You put someone on notice. Absolutely. All right. What if they say something slaps? Yeah, so it's a positive term, right? So it's something that's high quality. What does it mean if you catch a fade? Yeah, yeah. I'm gonna get punched. Yeah, I'm gonna get no fight. Ashley's winning. Um, what if something is no cap? I love watching her excitement as I show these on the screen. Yep. So it means you're telling the truth. You're not lying. Nunya, right, is none of your business. That one you could probably have deduced by context clues. What about big jokes? If I say that somebody's got big jokes. So it's an insult. It's like if you're talking trash about me, oh, you got big jokes. What if I spill the tea? Yeah, so it's gossip. So there's a whole bunch more, and so I'm just gonna flip through them. You can just laugh at them yourself. By
the way, y'all were way better than the group this morning. So shout out to you guys.
But it's goofy and it's silly, but it's important to understand that like language matters and the words we say matter. And so to make sure you know what words mean before you say them, because otherwise you end up in a really bad situation sometimes. You use the wrong word. But so this game is called Gen Z Say What, and it's one of the games that we sell over at projectymgames.com. But in a second, there's going to be a coupon code that's going to appear on the screen. You guys can go get this game for free if you want to play it. It's probably better to play with your adult volunteers because most of your young people are just going to get most of them anyway. And so this last one. Does anybody know what finesse means? If I finesse something. I like it, Ashley. Yep, it's to steal. So just take it. Yeah, I just take it. It's like you need things translated. Apparently, just call Ashley. She'll translate it for you. Now, so you're cheating. All right. So yeah, if you go to projectymgames.com, you can get this game. Use the coupon code Chicago, and it's yours. That code actually will get you one free game from any of the 50-something games on there. And so Gen Z is a great one, but there are a bunch of other ones if you would rather pick something else out. All right, cool. Let's keep rolling. All right. We're gonna keep going. Any questions? Oh, excuse me, before we start? Let me get back. No. Perfect. Okay. So let's go back to this idea of Babylon. So if we think about Jerusalem, right? So I don't know how much like biblical history you know, but right. So the Jews are living in Jerusalem, in a place where the temple, their faith, is literally at the center of town. Everyone there is Jewish, so it's mono-religious. Right? The Sabbath is really important. Everything is slower paced. It's homogenous. Everybody looks the same. Everybody's from the same culture. The Jewish officials, the leaders, have total control. And life is simpler because they're just following the rules. There's no difficulties, really. And the biggest idol, the biggest thing that like they fall prey to is false piety, right? This idea of just going through the motions. Compare that to after the Jews are conquered by Babylon and taken off into Babylonian captivity. Life in Babylon looks different. All of a sudden, they wake up in a city where they have to live their faith differently. Especially generation number 2 that has never experienced Jerusalem. Their only reality is a place where faith is at the margins. That is a pluralistic society because Babylon is the hub and the center of religious things from all across the continent. It's an accelerated, fast-paced lifestyle. It's very diverse. There's tons of different people that don't know anything. It's at its root open source. Everybody is sort of free to do their own thing. And there's a lot of tension because when you have that kind of freedom, it creates tension sometimes. And the biggest idol thing they fall prey to is fitting in, right? So you have this generation of Jews who start pretending not to be Jewish in order to fit in Babylon. Now, if you just look at those words, That's very similar to the world that young people live in right now, right? It's post-Christian faith. Their faith is at the margins. They go to a school that's pluralistic in most cases, that has religious views of all kinds, that life is accelerated. Like if you've ever, and now COVID has changed things a lot, but last year, if you were to look at the schedule of the average 10th grader, like it's insane the amount of things they've taken on. They live in, like I said, the most diverse generation ever, and really like their biggest concern is fitting in. And so the reason that this is important is a lot of times we do ministry like we're still in Jerusalem, but we really need to do ministry like we're building disciples in Babylon. And that changes the way things look. And I guess more accurately, we need to be building disciples for Babylon. Because if we have this generation that is broken and is post-Christian, we need to be creating a generation that's going into their world and sharing the gospel. Gen Z is definitely the most common term for this generation, but I like to call them Generation Prophet. Because if you look at the Old Testament, every time there's a nation of people, a collection of people who have strayed from God in desperate need of him, God sends a prophet to call them back to themselves. I believe that this is a generation that has the ability to call people back to him, that we are called to be creating prophets for Babylon. We're called to be prophet makers. And so where I want to spend the rest of this conversation, and we'll get into the nitty-gritty, is how we do that. If we can acknowledge that the world, the territory we're serving in is very different, that the target audience we have is very different. It's not us, right? I think more than anything else, hear that like if we're doing ministry because of who we were as a young person, with the exception of maybe Ashley, because she's Gen Z, that we're doing it wrong, right? Because that's not our target audience. The territory, if we're doing Jerusalem-based ministry, to young people who live in Babylon, we're missing the point. So let's talk about tactics. The tactic we use, or the philosophy that we teach, we call reach, feed, send. And here's the truth. There are a lot of people out there teaching youth ministry strategy. There are a lot of people teaching philosophies and models for ministry. I am one of those crazy people who just believes if I'm going to do ministry and I'm going to build it off of someone else's strategy, that I'm just going to look at the way Jesus did ministry and try to do my ministry as close as possible to the way Jesus did ministry. And so this reach, feed, send model is rooted in how Jesus time and time again did ministry. It's how he did ministry in the story we told earlier in the Land of the Gerasenes. It's how we did it in the story of the woman at the well. It's how we did it in the story of the road to Emmaus. Over and over again, this is how we see Jesus doing ministry. I'm a visual person, so let me give you a visual. This is what we're talking about. This idea of reach, feed, send. That we have intentional ministry models that are going out and reaching young people who are far from God, who are not there, right? Like a lot of times we fall into this trap of doing ministry only for young people whose butts are in the seats. And if that's the kind of ministry we're doing, we're missing the mark, right? If you want to get super biblical, right? So Jesus talked about we're called to do spread the gospel in Jerusalem, Judea, and Samaria, and to the ends of the earth, right? Jerusalem is the city in which they're standing in when he's having this conversation, right? So he's telling them, not only do you do it in Jerusalem, where you're comfortable and you know everybody, not only in the surrounding areas of Judea and Samaria, but actually go to the ends of the earth. So for us, our reach level is our to the ends of the earth. It's going out and reaching young people who are hurting, who are far from God, who are in need of love and in need of just transformation. And then it takes them into a feed-based program, which then ends in them being sent out to reach more students. It maybe is better visualized in a funnel, right? That this top level is our reach model, that we are trying to do whatever we can to reach as many students as we can. And we are funneling them into a feed program where we're nourishing them, where we're giving them opportunities to encounter Jesus. And then we're empowering and equipping them to be sent out and reach more students. Now, the flaw in this is, as you can just tell visually, right? So we're reaching a lot more students than we're feeding, but this is actually realistic. right? Because if we are looking at how many young people can we reach, we have to realize that not every young person that we encounter is going to want to jump into a Bible study with us, is going to want to go on a retreat or pray the rosary. And those are all great things and awesome things and great goals to have. But I think that we need to figure out how we're measuring success through different metrics. So for us, we look at it as the top of our funnel being what we call an entry point program. And then the bottom of our funnel being small groups, that we build our ministry around a small group model. And the goal is once young people are engaged in small groups, they're being fed, they're having the opportunity to experience love, community, and encounter Jesus, then they're going to be inspired and filled with the Spirit to want to be sent out and invite other people to join them. So that's where we're focusing our time as we go through the model and the process, is really rooted around this idea that small is the new big. And so we're going to talk about a couple of different things, but we're going to really focus on building small group ministry and how we make it successful. And so I want to say a couple quick things about that. I've worked in a lot of different parishes. I've worked in a lot of different contexts. I've worked with a lot of different youth ministers, and overwhelmingly small groups are the most effective way to do ministry. I have run small group programs that were literally one small group. And I've run small group programs that had 350 young people in small groups every single week by choice. None of our programs were required. We're not forcing young people into small groups. We're inviting them into small groups. And so we're going to talk mostly about the small group aspect. But if at the end, if you guys have questions about the entry point thing, we can talk all about that too, and I can explain how that works. But we're going to walk through how we see the small group model. And so it starts by defining the direction. The most important thing to do before you do anything is to be able to understand the why. Why are we doing small groups? What's the point? What's the purpose? Our big goal, and so I'm just going to use this as our example. So I inherited a ministry program that had about 120 young people every single week. It was a gathered program model, like a big event kind of model every Sunday. And these young people were truthfully forced to be there. It was part of a confirmation requirement. We crammed them into the room, 120 of them. And every year there were 120 new students, roughly, right? And so ministry is not effective if, when they're no longer forced to be there, they don't show up, right? So if that's the way we building ministry, if that's our barometer for success, we're missing, right? So we got rid of the large group model, and we got rid of the requirements and went to a model that was invitational in small groups. And in 2 years, we transitioned 120 young people who were there by force every single week to 350 young people in small groups by choice every week. And so our primary goal was, we were tired of young people slipping through the cracks. That when there's 120 people in a big room, no one notices when they don't show up next week. No one notices when a new student walks in. We wanted to prioritize new students and prioritize making sure every student was loved and included. And so we did that through small group models. That was our goal. We defined our goal as making sure that no student slipped through the cracks. That we created small groups, not as the entry point model, not as where they started, but where young people chose to take the next step. We always define the win in our ministry as when young people take the next step of owning their faith. Like our whole goal, like we want young people to leave our ministry owning their faith. And so every time they take that next step was an important thing. And so for us, small groups were part of that process. We wanted to make sure they were invited into that. All right, next step is creating the process. I'm a big believer in process. I think that a lot of times, and I'm guilty of this plenty, like we just get excited and we go off and we run and we do new things and we fly by the seat of our pants. And we fail to plan and create a process. But processes actually help us make sure that nobody slips through the cracks, right? They help make sure that there's follow-up with new students. They help make sure that there is connection with parents. And so We took time to define how the groups were formed. So just simple things like we made our groups gender-based. We made our groups focused around their grade, right? So we had 10th grade girls group and a 10th grade boys group. That's not always the case. Sometimes your ministry is not big enough to do gender and grade splits, so we would cluster them. The parish that my wife and I volunteer with here in Chattanooga is a very small parish. And so we have 4 small groups. We have a high school boys small group and a high school girls small group and a middle school boys small group and a middle school girls small group. So it depends on the context of your parish. You have to figure out how they join. Like I said, we built an invitational model. It was all about inviting them to take the next step. And we made it a big deal. Like for us, small groups were a big deal. They weren't just something that you did because your friends were doing it. Like we made it a big decision, a big deal. You come up with what happens when the groups grow, right? If your small group program is successful, right, your group should be growing. You should have this problem of, oh, all of a sudden there's now 12 people in this small group. That's not really a small group. What do I do? We would do the split model where you had 2 adults in every small group, and when the group got to be too big, it split into 2, and each adult got a new small group leader to join them. And that way, nobody felt like they were being kicked out. They felt like they were just growing. And just go through the logistics, like where and when and how are they going to meet. Once you have those logistics in place, you can start to prepare your team. You can start to figure out who you want to put on that team and how you will invite those leaders. We're running a free training in, I think, first week of November called the Volunteer Solution. That's all about how to recruit, train, and support your volunteers. It's important to find ways you're inviting them and to be excited about that, right? Like you want them to join to something that's winning. Nobody likes to join the losing team. And so when you get up there and like, woe is me, we don't have enough volunteers, we really need your help. Like nobody wants to jump onto a sinking ship, right? Like they want to be a part of something that's successful. And so you need to find ways to share the good of what's going on. You need to define a process for training your leaders. I think one of the big mistakes we often make is we assume that if I give a adult a small group discussion question list and throw them in a small group, that they'll be good, that they'll know how to handle it. The truth is most adults are terrified of talking to teenagers. They are. Like that's why they're so confused as to why you spend so much time working with teenagers, because they're terrified of them. And so when we make the assumption that if we just give them questions, they'll be able to do it, we're setting them up for failure. And so we really need to train them well and create a process for that. And we need to set the bar high. Like if we really are believing that part of the value of small groups is adults investing in the lives of young people, you want to make sure you're setting the bar high for who that adult is. If you've got children, think about what kind of adult you would want to be spending time with your child every single week. And you want to make sure we're setting that bar high. All right, next we have to choose the content. And truthfully, this is where most youth ministers spend most of their time, but really it's not as important as you think. You can run a good small group program with any content. I'm not saying like just don't put any thought to it, but a lot of times we get hung up on this. We start looking at all the options and we end up using this as the reason why we don't make a move. We get paralyzed, right, by too many choices. For what it's worth, my top 2 choices are Why Disciple and Alpha. If you're just starting a small group program, you should start with Alpha. It's amazing. Decide what the format is. I love video-based content. And some people push back because they feel like young people watch enough screens already. But the reason that I love video-based content is it puts less pressure on my adults. And my adults don't have to worry about planning a lesson. They can just worry about loving the students as they show up. And so I've seen so many adults like stress out over teaching a simple lesson. And so they don't focus on the young people present in the room. And I would much rather them watch a video and the adult facilitate conversation if it allows that adult to better serve those young people. And then figure out what else you're looking for. What's the other content you're hoping for? We encourage, and I don't know the rules in Chicago, so shake your head, Emily, if I'm telling them to do bad things. But we encourage our adults to reach out to young people at least once during the week in between their small group gatherings, whether that's text message or social media or mail them a postcard. Young people love receiving stuff in the mail. my favorite thing to do. It's hard to tell because you can only see my upper torso, but I wear flip-flops every day of my life if I can. And so young people know that. They see me wear flip-flops all the time. And as you can tell, like I color coordinate my flip-flops to what I'm wearing because why not? But if you take a flip-flop and you put a stamp on it and an address, you can mail a flip-flop. Like no packaging required, just mail the flip-flop. Can you imagine the look on the face of a young person when they show up at home after school and there's a flip-flop waiting? Like, it's awesome. You can mail a coconut, you can mail anything you can put a stamp on. Anyway, I digress. All right. Let's keep rolling because I want to have time for questions. Here we go. Okay. Make sure you share the excitement that hopefully small groups are something you're super excited about. And so you need to find ways to communicate that excitement and find ways to do it that resonates with your audience. Because the way you communicate that excitement to a young person is really different than the way you communicate that to a parent or a volunteer. The way you communicate that to your pastor is very different than you're communicating it with your small group leaders. And so just figuring out who your audience is and realize that the invitation matters. We build what we call an invitation culture where everything is about inviting young people to take the next step. They're not forced into anything, but the way you do invitation matters. The hardest thing for me about small groups is embracing my new role. When I had 350 young people in small groups, though I led a small group, my primary ministry was not about me. There were literally hundreds of teenagers in our program that had no idea who I was because it wasn't about me. Like their primary youth minister was their small group leader. And so my role shifts from working directly with young people to making sure that the volunteers that are serving them are taken care of, right? When you have 350 young people in small groups, that means you have 60 to 70 adult leaders, right? Like it's a very different world. So you need to make sure you're intentional about how you support your leaders. Define a process, schedule regular check-in times. If you're not meeting regularly one-on-one with your small group leaders, regardless of how many you have, you're missing it. Like you need to be temperature checking, you need to be finding out what they're doing, and you need to be praying for them daily. By name, list all your small group leaders on the wall somewhere, see their name every day and pray for them daily by name. Pray for your young people daily by name. Even if you have 350 of them, pray for them daily by name. Prayer is powerful. Next one is fill the funnel. Like we said, our funnel-based program really is focused on this idea of entry points, that we create a place for them to start, and then we make sure that there's a place for them to go. And so we fill that funnel, and we throw a big part every semester when we would do small group launches. We throw a big party, we make it a big deal, and we make it all about the invitation. Right, I'm gonna kind of crank through these last ones so we have time for questions. But the next one is find ways to celebrate. I think a lot of times when we look at what we're doing, it's really easy to pick out the things that are not working, right? It's really easy to nitpick what didn't go great. We need to find ways to celebrate the wins. I don't know if you've ever led a middle school boys small group, but it's awful. Like most middle school boys small groups are bad. They're tough. They're really hard to get young people talking. And so when you have your middle school boys small group leader come to you and say, hey, look, tonight we actually spent 90 seconds talking about the topic. Like that's a win. Celebrate that with them. Be excited with them. Celebrate those wins and then share the successes. Chances are your pastor only hears about things when stuff goes wrong, right? Like generally speaking, parents don't call the pastor to tell them about how amazing their youth minister is. They call to complain about something dumb you did. Right? And so you need to make sure you're being intentional about sharing the successes, sharing the good things as well. And then find ways for everybody to come together. We would do what we call group battles, which is basically like field day, which I know we can't really do now, but post-COVID maybe, that we would just have the teams compete against one another. Look, competition bonds people more than anything else in the world. And so the ability to bring them together is awesome. All right, last two, don't forget to think big. Understand that building a culture in your ministry takes time, but it's important. You can't make shifts overnight, but the more you can invest in creating a welcoming and inviting place for young people. It does matter. You need to make sure you're connecting students to the larger parish. If they're coming to small groups every single week, but they never go to Mass, we've missed something. And so we need to find ways to connect them to the larger parish and to the sacramental life of the church. And you need to find ways to bring groups together, not just for competition, but for prayer, for service, for other experiences as well. And lastly, let's talk about evaluation. We need to evaluate everything. We get really stuck a lot of times in ruts in the church where we just continue to do things the same way over and over again, because that's just the way it's always been done. And look, we know statistically the way the Catholic Church has been doing ministry for the last 20 years hasn't worked, right? That's why young people are leaving the church. And so we need to evaluate everything we're doing. We need to figure out what's working, but we also need to figure out what's not working. And we need to not do it in isolation, right? Bring other voices into the room, bring young people into the room for that conversation, bring parents into the room for that conversation. And don't wait to make changes. Like a lot of times, maybe we know something's wrong, but we figure, oh, we'll just finish the year, and we'll change it next year. Why? If it's not working, change it. Don't wait to make changes. Especially right now, COVID is the perfect excuse to change anything you want, right? Because if they complain, oh, it's not how we always do it, you can just say, well, we've never been in a global pandemic before, so it's a great out. But don't wait to make changes. And then I tell people the most profound tip that I've ever heard in ministry. You have to make sure you write things down. If you're going to evaluate your program as you go, make sure you're keeping notes. Write things down. You'll forget by the end of the year. If you wait till the end of the year to go back and look at what worked and what didn't work, you'll forget. Write things down. We have our small group leaders fill out a small group leader check-in sheet every single week. It's super simple. It takes them 60 seconds to fill out. It rates, through 1 through 5, how the group went, how was the group, how was the conversation, the content connected to young people, are there any concerns that you have, right? So it's really simple, but it allows us to, at a really quick glance, see how the small group leaders are doing. So for those of you who are note takers, define the direction, create the process, prepare the team, choose the content, share the excitement. Embrace your new role, fill the funnel, find ways to celebrate. Don't forget to think big and evaluate everything, because small is the new big. Again, if you have any questions, guys, seriously, shoot us an email. Our team loves talking to youth ministers. You can shoot us an email at hello@projectym.com, and we'll help you in any way we can. With that being said, I know we have a few minutes left. I am happy to answer any questions about anything we talked about, or anything else, like how amazing Chattanooga is, or why Sunkist is my drink of choice. Whatever you guys want to know. You can type them in the chat, or you can unmute and just talk. Or we can stare at each other for a few minutes.
I was intrigued by the data from the study that they did, and I was curious, when they asked the millennials and Gen X and the boomers, at what age did they ask them what identified their self-worth? Are they looking across?
So the data that they're using in comparison is done by other studies, right? So they didn't do those studies. So they're looking at a cross-section of studies done both in the formative years of those generations, right? So which is probably the best way to compare, right? So you're talking to other millennials when they were also 17 years old, 16 years old. But they're looking at a whole cross section of data. And so if you read the study, I am not a statistician by any means. They have a really complicated process they explain, but essentially they're looking at a cross section of all the data done by other smart people, not them. There's also, if you go to what is GenZ.com, I think is what I put up there. There's also videos. There's some free videos that go into detail about some of the other stuff too. But again, the actual study is excellent. It's worth a buy, but I think it's $35. Other questions?
Michael, I have a question regarding, you did mention about the volunteer solution training.
Yes.
Is there a time, or is there a way that I can get some more information on that? I'm putting a team together, so I would like to get some more,
Yes.
you know, possibly send them there.
So two things. So the volunteer solution training, I believe is November 2nd. It's a free webinar. We walk through that whole process. The best way to find out about it is to go to projectym.com, and you can like sign up for our email list and you'll get a reminder about it. But also we run the Catholic Youth Ministry discussion group, which is the largest Catholic Youth Ministry Facebook group. There's like 7,000 other youth ministers. If you're not a part of that, you should go join that right now. It's a great wealth of resources to find out more about. We're also in November launching this thing called the Volunteer Institute, which is a 12-month online program that your volunteers can go through to get trained and resourced as volunteers. It's like 5 minutes a week of training for them, but over the course of a year, they learn everything that a rockstar volunteer needs to know. So that launches in November as well. And that's volunteer.institute.
So, and it's volunteer that you say?
So that one is volunteer.institute. You can go sign up to be.
Volunteer.institute. Okay, awesome.
But all this is at projectym.com too, if you check it out. The other thing I didn't mention, as we're talking about just free resources, if you go to cymvideos.com, we got a bunch of our youth minister friends to create 3 to 5 minute videos for you to use. Like if you're doing virtual youth nights about a variety of topics, they're all free. You can just go download any of them. I think there's like 20 of them right now, but we add new ones every week or so. But it's at cymvideos.com. Really, again, Project Ram exists to just try to figure out how we support you, how we make your ministry easier and more effective. So if there's anything else you need, that email address is the best way to get anything you need.
Awesome.
What else? Other questions? Nothing.
All right. If there's no other questions, first of all, I just want to thank Michael for being here and thank you all for coming. I know it's late, so thanks for bearing with us. Michael, anything else?
No, go make sure you get your free game. Like I said, there's like 50 something games up there, so check them out.
Cool.
Great. Thanks for being here, everybody. Have a good night.
Bye, y'all.
Bye. Thank you.